In the occult world, it's something very much about exploring and coming into deeper communion or gnosis with what is. And like you could have a frame about like coming deeply more into connection with God. And the circling practice in the relational meditation, I found it being very powerful at actually providing a context for this deep exploration in a way that a private meditation would struggle.
The container is now open. Today we are with Ben Hodgson, who is a high-level practitioner of the Transformational Connection lineage. He spends his time facilitating group events, bringing people into deep present moment awareness and human connection. And he also trains leaders in the field, including Sai and myself, who are right now in a 6-month-long program, and one of the leaders is none other than Ben Hodgson. But today we're talking about something that's like so near and dear to my heart. We're talking about the mystical tradition of Kabbalah and the related field of sort of the Western mysteries. And if some of those things don't make sense yet, don't worry, we'll get you informed. But it's so exciting. I've always felt that these group mindfulness practices could be really enriched by having more shared maps of reality than just the sort of default materialist one that we're raised in and live in all the time. So this conversation is something I've really been wanting to bring to the container. And I'm so glad to have Ben to be the one to do it with us. Before we jump into that, I just want to give a shout out to our patrons. They went to patreon.com/thecontainer, and they committed to making small monthly donations that help pay for the show. And yeah, and also all the people who like and subscribe and rate and review in Apple and Spotify and on YouTube, all that stuff really actually helps, and it's entirely free. And it makes a big difference. So thank you guys. With that, I'd like to welcome into the container Ben Hodgson.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hi,
Good
Ben.
to see
you. So start us out. Tell the people about your story getting into the world of circling and then the world of the occult.
I think I came to the world of the occult slightly earlier than the world of circling, but I don't. Yeah, they're not entirely unrelated. I always was like quite fond of the. I think the tarot stood out for me, for example, as just a very beautiful, very fascinating, very mysterious cultural object, and I kept finding references to it, and eventually I found a little charity shop book, and I just started reading through it, and I just was just really taken by the amount of like wisdom that there seemed to be in this practice, and there's something about like noticing that there's a way in which I felt always drawn to a kind of magical aspect of being. I guess you could call it maybe like poetry, or just like having moments. Maybe these are just delusional things when you're like, oh, something happens and you go, wow, that was really, really odd, but somehow I feel profoundly moved. So these moments of like, deep, I don't know how you describe it, maybe passion, or just feeling, very touched by things. And just feeling like how magic in some way was just an essential part of that. And later on in my life, when I was going through a flea market bookstore, I found a book from Aleister Crowley, and I was like, oh wow, this is a bit of a strange find because they're quite rare, and just started reading through it, not quite know what to expect, and I was really impacted by this, like when somebody's kind of like portrayed as a kind of crazy geezer who does all this odd stuff, which is justifiable because he was a crazy geezer who did lots of odd stuff. But then you find out a lot of what he's saying is actually quite interesting, or it's like there's some kind of logic there, which actually does seem to make sense. Then I was like, okay, I'm gonna look a little bit closer at this.
How old were you, like when you're starting to? Once you start reading Crowley, the end is near, is my experience.
That was around like I think it would be early 20s, early to mid 20s.
Hmm.
The tarot thing was earlier than that. And I even remember when I was very young. I think it was one time when I was like, just one day I decided to make myself everything I needed to be a wizard, which involved a shoebox, which I kind of made up into a familiar little book that could record magic spells. And I even like went into the garden, sort of got some flowers and mushed them up to make potions. So I remember this kind of interest with the world of magic was lasting quite a long time.
Hmm. Something I want to, yeah, stop and honor there is this urge in some of us to be wizards, and being born at a time where um there's not really a lot of space for being a wizard. And I think when people hear that, they imagine like, oh, wizard as like something like a wizard. But I mean, I think a lot of us just in our hearts were born the archetype of like a wizard. Like that is actually the fullness of what yeah, what some of us were put on earth to be. So I like love this thought of young Ben feeling that like fate's call for that and the fullness of that.
Yeah, like I notice when you share that, it's like I notice there's a way in which I think there's something about the practice of magic which transcends like time or something. And it's something like, yeah, something about maybe relationships with the great beyond, relationships with mystery, relationships with beauty, like stepping into like deep moments of presence and like understanding. So yeah, it feels like there's a lot of stuff which I think will always be part of what it is, and in some ways, I actually feel it's really like important. Almost like there are ways in which, almost like with some of the old fairy stories about how the fairies may have left Albion or something. Like there's something about our relationship with magic which feels incredibly important to who I am, and I think other people feel it too. And it's not about delusion per se, but it's something about like our relationships with meaning and truth. And I just feel like something really essentially true for me. I don't think I could live without
I'm just like getting full body chills already. I'm like yeah, and in my mind's eye, it's like the camera is swooping down. There's like a boom shot coming back down to 25-year-old Ben, who's got this book by the madman Aleister Crowley. And I'm curious where, yeah, if we could pick that up, like what happened then, because that guy can drive the sturdiest of us crazy in good ways and in other ways.
Yeah, I think this may come across perhaps as even a bit arrogant, I imagine. It's something about how I remember, like from when I was very young, part of like who I was growing up was a way of trying to make meaning more for myself in some ways. Like there would be some kinds of conversation I remember not necessarily being able to have with the people around me for whatever reason. Um, and then, yeah, with reading Crowley's book, it was a sense of like, oh yeah, I don't know how far I can push this. I don't know how far this is into madness, how far this is into grace. So I feel very open to sort of, taking some bits and leaving others. So I think in the past, some people have been like, oh, well, that's very arrogant and presumptuous. You need to really go into the practice and almost like properly devote yourself to a practice to know it. And I think that's true. And I think there's also space for innovation and people to do their own thing. So yeah, somewhere between those, I'm hoping that I've learned some wisdom without necessarily going a bit too crazy in the process. Fine line to walk.
Yeah, I'm imagining then the next step is discovering circling. Is that?
Yeah. So this kind of magical interest carried with me, and I was in like Devon when I found the book from Crowley, and then eventually, like, this was a big part of my life where I was, yeah, lots of changes were happening. I was coming out at this time. A lot of things I thought were true were being questioned. So lots of stuff was shaking. Lots of stuff about my identity. Lots of stuff about like confidence, and maybe a sign of this like emerging confidence or bravery was moving to London. And in the process of this movement to London, I was also going along to find out a little bit about my boss's brother's company, because my boss's brother said, "Oh, my his brother needs a website building." So I said, "Well, okay, what's the website about?" And I was told, "Oh, it's a website about something called circling." I went, "That's great. What is that?" If I don't know what it is, it's hard to build a website to advertise it. So I ended up going to I think one of the earlier, not the earliest, but like one of the earlier weekend circling kind of workshops in London. I think Sean and John were both there at this time, and quite a few people who I've known for very long. I like, yeah, just lots of very beautiful people, and not knowing what it was about, and then going in there and just having a very like incredibly profound experience. Like something about the way we were started talking about parts of our experience that previously had no real place in conversation. We were being invited to share these like experiences without necessarily having understanding. So something about inviting places of, yeah, liminal or marginal understanding, inviting places of more kind of sensory experience and imagery, and stuff which is very easy to filter out when people are in a, in a dialogue in the street or something. And then over this weekend, I just found parts of myself kind of coming back online in a way which made me, like, I have now the story. There's something about like for some reason they were all dormant, and I don't know why. Like maybe something had happened when I was younger, or yeah, for whatever reason, or they just weren't seemingly needed in my life. And one of these was something about, yeah, giving aspects of my experience, like there's some point to them. Once they seem more meaningful because people were asking in the circling practice, it was part of the practice to explore this and maybe verbalize. Because these started to have more point or meaning to them, they became more real for me. Like I became able to see them better. The impressions got stronger. Um, and yeah, my memory, I was able to latch onto them in my awareness more. So basically it helped me to access these things. And that's been just a huge journey since that point, was, yeah, just starting to notice things that I wouldn't have noticed before. And the other was just having been in the city on the way to these workshops and back, I became aware of just how much I seemed to be almost like shielding myself or numbing myself in some way, because all the stimulus and kind of sensory experiences that can kind of bombard in a city, noises and people's presence, and yeah, senses of like witnessing emotional interactions, just finding that there was some kind of numbing or shielding. And with that kind of awareness, I was doing that. I was able to play with that a bit more and became softer, and I could, yeah, again step more into the intensity or the vibrancy of my experience more. Which is quite a long-winded way of describing it, but it was really, really powerful.
Well, I think something about the depth you decide to go into in that description really helped me make a connection in a relational art where you're taking the time to be in touch with, as you beautifully said, these liminal or marginal or mm, harder to fully understand parts, these emergent little things going on the periphery of our conscious experience. Um, as we weave that into the field of connection, we kind of bring them more into the fullness of being, and we're able to see them better and get a more workable relationship with them. Uh, and then as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about the 20 something reading Aleister Crowley and being awakened to the maybe the dormant parts of your inner sort of wizard nature of having a desire to wield meaning and to construct meaning yourself, and to I'm seeing both of those processes as like so two sides of the same coin. It's like the same work um in some ways. It's almost like circling is this amazing discipline that gives us the sensitivity and the awareness to actually know the material that's here that you will shape and wield as you're doing magic. So it's almost like the it just gives you more of the material that it's your clay finding mission is circling or something.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of brings something up for me because maybe a little bit clearer. Because I think I remembered when I started doing circling, it was almost like a puzzle I had. It's like I, I in some way intuitively know that this practice is deeply, profoundly powerful and magical, but I can't articulate why. And the puzzle was like, yeah, can I actually get more sense of what that is? And yeah, I can see a story about there being a way of like, oh, it's somehow like, yeah, presenting more material, accessing more material. I think maybe it runs, maybe for me, it could even run deeper. There's something about, like in the like the occult world, there's something very much about exploring and coming into deeper communion or gnosis, if that's the right way to pronounce it, with what is. And like you could have a frame about like coming deeply more into connection with God, essentially so, and like reflecting on what identity is, what we are in that relation, in that communion. And in that process, we are exploring. And the circling practice in the relational meditation, it's something like I found it being very powerful at actually providing a context for this deep exploration in a way that a private meditation would struggle. So it's almost like, first of all, there are aspects of this kind of dialogue with self, but with other and through into God, where this is like just very powerfully supporting that. And in this sort of, yeah, maybe a softening or a revelation of identity, I think there's is something just essentially magical about that process. It's like, yeah, like the ability to shift perspective, the ability to commune with paradigms which seem to be other, but in fact, in some way, are not. That are already like deeply known. Like these for me, I think are essential parts of magic. And I think it's almost like, yeah, circling just very powerfully seems to support this process because it
Mm.
does seem to be unfolding, excavating, revealing.
I'm feeling this renewed vigor around around a project of like evangelizing circling among magical people, uh, and vice versa. I notice even as you're describing this communion, it's very easy to go into a circling event and you sit down with people and you're sort of locked in these dialogue modes between people in a very psychology adjacent it's almost like therapy adjacent worldview where we're sort of um, we're like healing things. So things are getting healed by us attending more deeply to ourselves and each other, which is beautiful. That's like if it was just that, that's what more do you really want? But then it's also like, well, what about communing with God right now, or with the angels, or with the fairies, or with I don't know, the Tifereth Sephira on the Tree of Life. Like, what if we could? What if there is just like whole other worlds we can travel to in the practice? Um, And like the thing I think that holds people back from that is simply not knowing that's even available, that that's something that we could do, or that they would be accepted in doing.
Yeah, I like that invitation. It seems true and it feels powerful. Also noticing I'm enjoying the process of exploring this because like there's a sense in which I really don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. So I'm very
Mhm.
curious to see what I actually end up saying. Look forward to listening to it later as well. Like, what the hell did I end up bringing through? Um, yeah, like there's a way in which yeah, I can see a lot of potential for like yeah exploring like really deep places, um, very deep mysteries, and it seems true. And I think this is there are reasons why I think this is also part of the practice, that there's also a kind of grounding and anchoring element.
Mm.
So yeah, and I think this is another aspect of magic which stands out very powerfully for me. Something like an essential part of magic, maybe yeah, possibly even the essential. I don't know, but something about if we're encountering these other paradigms, if we're encountering God or whatever, like there's a way in which yeah maybe reality can be layered. So it's like you can meet the same thing at different levels of reality, different levels of understanding. So it's like I may not meet God directly in some ways. I might need to meet the other through some kind of intermediary. Maybe I'm meeting someone through a story of psychology. Maybe I'm meeting someone through a story of having a conversation. But there may be ways in which I could deepen, and they might deepen as well into a layer that opens more and brings more potential into that meeting. So yeah, in a way, it's like I think I like the way I've always liked the way the tree of life, for example, it kind of has a correspondence with the human body. It's like yeah, in a way, it's like the body. In a way, it's like Christ. In a way, it's like God. In a way, it's like just my physical being. So like there are different layers of this already, and I like that invitation just to yeah hold that while we're in the practice. There's a way in which we're reaching up, we're reaching towards the skies, towards openness, towards the depths of the earth, whatever. We're bringing more into our awareness, but at the same time, we are, you know, in time, we are in bodies, we are relating to people, and the practical aspects of this as well, and finding ways to do that seem to be more honoring and don't lead us into some sort of disassociation or other.
Yeah, that last part feels so, in some ways it's a great speed limit to me, and it frustrates me. And then in other parts it's like, well, making sure you're not dissociating, or there's like good dissociation and like mere dissociation. And if you're merely dissociating and going into cartoon worlds so that you don't have to encounter what's actually going on in like your body, or there are ways we can use magic as like a fantasy escape, I guess. And if we're doing that, there's like, yeah, there's concern there. But then I notice I also get frustrated. Like, yeah, let's just go as hard and fast as we can to the horizon and see what happens, folks. Like, what's the harm in that, Realizing that I
Yeah,
guess there probably is a lot of potential harm, but
I get touched by something like an incredible potential for trust in what you're sharing now.
mm,
It's like the ability to trust so deeply that I would be able to just dive off the edge and fly or something, or step onto the water and float or something.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have this itch to go more specifically into Kabbalah as a doorway for people to explore this. So if you clicked on this video because of uh, the tree of life on the thumbnail or whatever, then this stuff you already know, and the doorway is to circling. But if you're a circler, this is, I think I think Kabbalah, just as a it's a Jewish mystical tradition that I think began in the Middle Ages, but they, arguments could be made it began when Moses went up Mount Sinai. And it's probably its greatest gift to us is the glyph, the tree of life. And it outlines these 10 it's almost like 10 prisms that the light of God travels through to get from God shape to earth shape. I want to know how you use this tool, and like really use it, like tactically use it, and get reps on it, and get things done through it.
Yeah, it's been a very powerful map for me, the Tree of Life, and I'm still, yeah, and learning, I think, how powerful it is. It started off as more like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what this is all about. And yeah, the idea of somehow God's essence emanating or rippling into being as making being, making creation. And then there's this kind of mathematical aspect to it. Like there's a way in which there's a lot of powerful numerology coming through Kabbalah, working on things like, God starts in the like an ineffable place, and then as he enters into existence or something, that's like it's like the pinprick, like the atom splits or something. There's like a point which has no dimensions or something, and then the second point on the Kabbalah is like a line which then has direction, and then the third point introduces like a triangle which starts to have a sense of depth, but it's still like a triangle. It's abstract. It doesn't have physicality yet. And then when you get to the fourth sphere, it becomes like it has a pyramid or something. It starts to have physical dimensions, and that's a critical point in the Tree of Life, where it crosses over this mysterious abyss, which is basically very abstract, into the physical world. And it carries on this way, kind of like says how it's sort of like meaningfully developing through in this kind of system. There is some quite powerful stuff which arises, almost like, yeah, surprisingly, like as a result of this attempt to be rigorous. In a way, like how can we be rigorous about the study of God or magic? And it's like, yeah, I like that rigor, because it does seem to be powerful. And then it's like the how they decided on how the map works is a mystery. I don't know, maybe this is some like revelation that came directly down, because it's like it hangs together in a very beautiful way. And each sphere has certain qualities and aspects, and by like meditating on these aspects, what they're kind of expressing, like I've started to have like images and like experiences, because I think it can be like a meditative tool that helps to almost like attune to different frequencies of creation, to different frequencies of what's happening. So already at that point of meditating on this map, on this tree, there's a way in which you start to discerning certain frequencies. And it's like, in a way, it tends to be really holistic, complete. It tries to say, like in the whole range of human experience as possible, this is a rigorous way that can allow you to attune and discern. And then even there are stories and narratives which can start to come out about how these different spheres and energies, how they interrelate, how you can travel around, and even how, if you wanted to, commune with God more deeply, is even like, oh, you would do it by integrating these aspects. You would do it by traveling in a way through up the tree in a certain way. And there are lessons to be learned. Like, what does it mean to travel along these paths between these 10 spheres? And it's like stuff is happening here. And one metaphor which I quite like for the Tree of Life is almost like a trellis in a way. It starts off very bare bones. It's almost like, there's some lines on a page, some circles and some text. But as you start to meditate on it, it starts to become more part of your awareness. But it's not just another map. It's actually resonating with the experience in a way that it's almost transforming the meaning in you and your understanding of meaning. In a way, it kind of starts to live inside you. It starts to gain its own life. It starts to flourish, and like a trellis, like something beautiful starts to grow on this trellis. This tree springs into life, and and deepening in the practice in this exploration. It's just so rich and beautiful and painful, and I feel a lot of wonder. A lot of wonder.
It's really bringing me to the when you were just talking about like the how it's holistic, but then also sort of as a trellis things grow on it, and I'm touched by this way that if you can map it onto the body and you can map it onto the universe, like actual physical reality, and then you can map it onto human psychology and our relationships, all of these different things, then when stuff grows on it, it like is growing in all of these different places at once. It's so if one of these spheres starts to take on a certain um, set of experiences for you, those have resonances through all of these different ways of constructing reality and thinking about what's going on. My body, the material, the way the universe actually works, the my mind. Just as I'm listening to you and going into that exploration, I can feel this weightlessness that starts to take over as I start to appreciate how really far out we can understand really far out things through like your arm being sore, or feeling frustrated when someone says something in a circle. It's like that feeling frustrated could all speak to this, like the inherent creative destruction force in the universe, or it like can really, you can make these connections that start to like really bring in so much material. It's yeah, I'm feeling like almost just like lost in the library right now with all of the things coming up in me as I'm just chewing on what you said.
Yeah. When I found out that the tarot mapped onto the tree of life, it again was just a very powerful exploration. Having studied the tarot for quite a while, I would then be able to have moments where I'd be experiencing, for example, something in a circle, and a certain tarot card would come into my awareness. It'd be something about like just the habitually being attuning to certain energies or certain qualities. When I would start to experience those in the circle, I would start to then have these associations like, well, there's something here which is something like, yeah, quite authoritative, or something quite like feels like a connection more to an expressive energy from God, or something feels more like deep and like slightly more shadowy, or something sparked across the circle there, quite powerful energy just shift. So it's something about this form of meditation with the tree of life and with the tarot starts to then attune to certain things that can happen in the circling space, which can start to help verbalize, and even start to, yeah, you start to have other ways of conversing about it, like image based explorations. So places where we go into non-verbal, it's like there's still a way we can navigate those, even though if we maybe our throats are seized up, or the parts which would start to give meaning to the experience start to shut down, there's still a way we can learn to navigate through those spaces. Um, and that's been very helpful for me in the circling practice as well. But also the circling practice itself has been helping to furnish the tree, furnish the wisdom, furnish the exploration which is growing in that. So they feel very very inter supportive.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking back to this, your first kind of description of circling, the experience of it, of these sort of marginal, just barely in, partly in the light of your conscious awareness, these bits and pieces being available because you're going slow with others and you're in connection, and there's sort of a place to put those things now in connection where you might not in normal everyday conversation. And I'm thinking about how in your magical journey, you're sort of um, summoning these elements or ways of seeing and understanding, and so often they exist at first there on the edges. They're tentative. They're um, these like maybe more kabbalistic insights into your experience might just be on the edges, and you can only see like an arm or a tail or something of them. And so it takes a practice like circling to kind of seduce them into the light, to uh give them treats and have them skitter in where you can really see them and appreciate them and feed them and nourish them and relate to them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like the uh, and the yeah. So I guess there's also the associated sort of like this came a bit more through Crowley's stuff, the kind of the ritual magic approach, which I think is also interwoven into Kabbalah, like is something about the journey of exploring the mysteries and about kind of communing with the other, but doing that in a way which somehow is honoring of integrity. It's a bit like, I guess maybe one of the stories would be something like the there are many stories about this, like the magician who summons something and then there's some kind of deal and the deal goes a bit wrong and oopsie daisy, I'm sure there are moralistic tales of cautionary, like this is why we don't do magic, boys and girls. Um, but there's also another layer of this, which is something like when we are doing magic, there is something that magic is actually helping us to do or guiding us around, which is like there are pitfalls, there are traps. I mean, we've spoken about delusion already, but there are ways in which, as we start to explore like the full immensity of God's creation, there are almost like pitfalls and traps and mistakes that are very easy to make, and many people have made many times over the course of history. And the practice of magic, ritual magic, and I also think in a lot of ways this is paralleled in the circling I've done. I think that the principles, I think, are also doing this in a kind of parallel. They're kind of helping us to meet the other in a way which helps us to retain our integrity, honor what is happening in some way. And I think when we fall out of the practice, it's often leading to suffering, and it makes sense.
That's really fascinating. I'm thinking of the sort of cute way I like to frame one of the issues that leads to, I think, the wizard getting in over his head, summoning something that kind of goes awry. The cute way I try to frame that is like, you want to learn how to speak to demons, but you can't speak to your mom, or like, you can't talk to your uncle at Thanksgiving dinner, or like, but you the hubris to be like, oh, but I can put on robes and draw some sigils and commune with demons, that I can do that. It's like, there's a way of like being called into integrity in relating. Like, circling helps you do that in very banal relations, which I think is not a bad place to start. That's probably the place to start. And then there's this way that but I like this thought of how ritual magic, it kind of gives you a structure to be in integrity, or to relate with clarity, and especially like by demand. A lot of ritual magic will demand a period going into it of I don't know, celibacy, or fasting, or you're kind of purifying yourself. And I think I feel that energetically a lot in, like, even going into difficult conversations. Like if Sai and I have a difficult conversation, it's like I need to go in there kind of chilled out. I need to not be on my phone, and then like hop into a difficult conversation. There's like, yeah, there's a way that I really, this insight about ritual magic has me, yeah, wanting to do it right. Like, I want to get off this call and go, crack a grimoire, and like, okay, let's do it from this angle.
Yeah, and it also plays out. I think places we often, I think, in the circling practice, we can like make in some ways like, oh, I was really angry at them, but it was actually I was really scared or something. It's like there's so many times this trope plays out where we're projecting things onto the other, or the parts of our own experience which we are unearthing and learning through the other. So it's like, and ritual magic is already kind of pointing at ways where um we're trying to like really get with our sensation, stay with the level of our sensation, but we're also really honoring the gift of reason and the ability to discern. Like, these are very important things. And then something about the very importance of desire and will. Like, what is it we want? and then as we unearth that deeply, it's like, oh, it really is quite a deep question. It's like, because bound into with identity and transformation, and it's like, it's almost like by meditating on these aspects of the ritual magic, it's almost changing the game completely. And I think this happens through circling as well. It's like, whether you're staying with the level of sensation, the circling practice, which would be honoring the magical weapon of the chalice, or whether you're trying to own your experience with discernment, which would be honoring the knife, the reason, or whether you're trying to like, what is it I want, like, what's alive in me, what's my passion in this moment, what's driving me, which for me is very much the suit of wands. It's like the the significance of willpower and the wands in ritual magic. And then for me, the final one, the pentacle, is very much being embodied, being with our embody, deeply trusting our experience, like really coming into being without like this kind of, oh, I don't know, is like really deeply embodying in that, which is kind of like the coins in ritual magic. There's a way in which I seem to have created these parallels, which I think actually do match up meaningfully, I think, to the circling principles that I've been working with TC, Transformational Connection. And I don't think it's an accident. Like, it seems important that there is this parallel, because it's like a whole part of what we're doing is this kind of journey of exploration and communion. But if we don't honor these principles in circling, we can see how it goes a bit weird. And in ritual magic, it makes sense. It's the same. If you don't strengthen these kind of magical tools, there's a way in which you will fall into certain pitfalls and traps.
I really like those making connection between those pitfalls and traps that can open up. It feels so much safer, the pitfalls and traps that can happen in circles. So there's a way you can like kind of learn there in the gymnasium of a circle, like, oh, I'm not really in integrity around what I want. I'm like hiding what I want and framing it as like what my body feels or what my reason says. Or that's the one I like to do, is hide my my shameful desires around like reason. Like, well, really the smart thing here is this, and then really you're like angling to get a desire met. And all that to say that, like, in the circle, it can be so relatable, the pitfalls that you fall into, because they're the ones, I guess, that you live in all the time with all of your relationships. And then there's I guess there's also added threat. I think there's like this added concern if you're in a practice where a lot of people are being kind of vulnerable and exploring maybe things that are a bit require some trust. If you're not actually living up to the trust you're being given, things can open up that are hurtful to you and to others. And and then another pitfall I'm noticing that they're like stacking up for me. There's like something about circling is you can, when you're really cooking on it, a lot of stuff that comes up ends up sort of disappearing in your hands. Like, you might be like, oh, I want us to go slower. And then you're like, well, wait, like, do I actually want that? Or is that like a memory I have of what we should be doing, that I, by expressing it, am I actually trying to get this other thing? And it's like, it reminds me of magic, when magic starts to freak you out and make you go insane, where it's like, the more I look at anything, the less real anything is. You kind of dissolve all hard reality. So I don't know. Those are thoughts coming up as you note that.
Yeah. I love it. I think when you said something about like maybe something about it's a safer place in some ways to be like with a person in like a circling workshop or something. It's like, it seems true. And I couldn't help but think like, oh yeah, something about the some of the traps are about safety. Like, oh yeah, like this is safe and this is not safe. It's like, oh yeah, some of the quite powerful ones are the ones which last your entire life because they were the safest or something. Um, yeah, I feel a lot of stuff kind of moving through my chest and like in my awareness, and I feel a little bit lost in it.
I have a question for you, a practice question. We've spent some hours circling together in on the physical plane. And there's something that I notice practicing with you. A like something I've learned about circling, just being around you and seeing how you practice, is there is a a way that you often show up, which is exquisite, what I would call exquisite listening. And yeah, it often shows up with like what I experience is your system feeling really, um at least to be in the field with you, your system feels really relaxed and but also leaned forward. And then there's like a no rush to produce anything. There's like a yeah, there's sort of like there's not like a rush to do. Yeah, and that touches on, for me, a lot of work I'm doing right now on trying to do nothing, as the old man Lao Tzu taught us.
Should definitely try harder.
Yeah. There's It's just remarkable when I put my attention on, am I trying to, like, am I doing right now? Yeah, and then sometimes, like, yeah, it's not a bad image to return to Ben in the circle. Sometimes there's like a strength of do nothing in your practice um that feels very mystical or magical, and I imagine it plays a role in the way that you attend to your magical path too. And so, well, like, wow, yeah, I want to know more about that feature.
So one frame which I think often comes up in the circling trainings, and I think it makes a lot of sense that it does, is that of like seeing through things through the lens of like God's perfection, like everything is perfect. And there is something really powerful about that. Like it's yeah, kind of transcends or softens the objectification of things as problems or struggles, and allows something like a more essential way of just being with what is happening, which doesn't necessarily mean nothing needs to change. Like, there are definitely places where change can emerge, but it moves through, I think, from like almost like a different mind or a different awareness. It's almost like, yeah, like, say if I'm being in a circle in this way, and I'm really opening myself to what is moving, what is sharing, what is rippling, what is happening, really being with often the glory and the tragedy of what is playing out. And then I'm no longer, because there could be a very easy way in which we become witnesses, or passive witnesses. But if I'm not doing that in a passive way, if I'm really actively in this, then it's almost like my agency is bigger than just me or something. Like something moves through. That's the kind of doing which feels more powerful for me, and I think I'm often drawn to that more. And yeah, it just feels somehow stronger than, like, if I were to try to address something directly, if I was to come from a place of, oh yes, helping, fixing, saving, doing, there's a way in which it feels narrower, and it doesn't seem to be, yeah, so impactful or whatever, so potent. And yeah, so I imagine there is something about this, like, perfection, sense of perfection and beauty, and just really being with the beauty, that allows it a deeper kind of way of being with emergent truth or something. And I also have a deep interest and like fondness for like the dark side of the tree of life, the way in which I think they're called Cliffoff or something. And that's probably a terrible pronunciation, so apologies to anyone who actually knows the correct one. It's almost like there's a way in which there's a lot of coded information into the aspect of these different spheres on the tree of life, which are like in some ways holding God's essence of these different frequencies. And then the idea that there are ways in which these spheres can somehow like become hollow. There's a way in which, like in certain places or contexts, it becomes hard to feel or be like connect with God's light. And these could be moments like lapses of faith. It could be moments of like demonizing other people. It could be moments of like profound aloneness, which feel like God is no longer here. So and I think all of these different spheres, there's a way in which I think there's quite a meaningful study about when God's light seems to be missing. I deeply trust that it never is, but it seems true that there are places where it becomes harder to feel that. And something about the way in which these, like, it's almost like there's a wisdom or an understanding in how that happens, which I find really interesting because I see it happening in circling space as well. It's almost like certain patterns start to play out. And it's like, why in this moment is something harder to trust? Why in this moment does something seem so far away? And it's like, I think through this kind of meditation, but also through the exploration of the tree of life, I think I'm hoping to get better at being a kind of divine chirurgeon in some way. It's like, yeah, there's a way in which, like, I think we can, by holding this like awareness of perfection, by deeply coming into understanding about the ways in which as humans we human, and in that process we can forget how beautiful and how divine and how exquisite God's creation is, like how we can find our way back and ways in which we can do that. And by learning that kind of process, that way of navigating experience and reality, I think we can move with grace. And that's something which I feel very drawn to, is like, yeah, learning how, yeah, there is a way of knowing, a deep knowing that almost allows us to flow with these movements and dance with them. And yeah, when someone is going into darkness, it's like, yeah, how can we join them there? Oh, I feel touched. Oh, yeah, and just somehow in that communion, we bring the light that they forgot or something. We can, yeah, there's enough. Yeah, that kind of meeting just, yeah, seems to have a lot of impact on me. It feels very powerful, and that seems to be more about, yeah, this sense of perfection, about sharing it and holding it. By holding it, we keep faith, we keep trust, and we can move in those directions or something.
I'm really moved by the way I hear you utilize the principles of the circling practice towards this really, really meaningful spiritual end of getting to the light together, or getting to grace together. And there, like, as I'm feeling into that, there's a way that's a really, it's a really core, remarkably deep practice of community in that seems to be really missing in places that aren't circling events. There's a poverty I'm sensing in me around that being what we're doing together, and that you can use the technology of like the Kabbalah or other like mystical traditions. You use that as a technology to navigate in the space of circling to utilize the principles towards this sort of I almost don't want to call it a destination, because there's like a goal orientation in that wording that maybe is doesn't capture really what you're talking about. It's sort of like we're in the water and we will float up to the light. It's it's like losing the encumbrances that are pulling us down away from the light or something. Yeah.
I just feel very touched when people share their experience, and there's so much seems to come through in these shares. Like I always like something about being with you in the water, and I feel like the depths or the space of that, and something about the light above and a sense of upward movement. It already feels quite powerful. And yeah, how transformative it is when you start to play with these kind of ways of meaning and framing. How can we bring the light in more? Yeah, how do we other it? And anyway, yeah, but yeah, the the stuff I've been like learning through the meditation with the Tree of Life has definitely supported me in holding my integrity as I explore, which I think makes sense with what I've said about the way in which ritual magic and these explorations, they need a certain rigor in a way which to help you be able to do this without losing yourself or becoming prey to something. And then the circling is very much a great fertile place to practice, and often seems to support my sense of trust and faith. Very much into supportive.
So you bring up rigor. I notice in me there's also this acknowledgement, not only that rigor keeps you grounded in a way, or keeps things sorted enough that you're not blowing out your ability to make sense of anything. But I noticed there's also in me this call for rigor that shows up a lot in both circling and magic, where if you're not very rigorous, then the fruits of the practice will actually be quite cheap and quite effervescent and maybe just very thin and surface level. I notice this a lot in circling. I can, when you really have a lot of rigor, you can leave a night of circling feeling like you just ran a marathon. Like, whoa, there was a lot of work to do, like a lot of showing up, a lot of going deep can have that effect. And then there's also a way, once you learn kind of how people talk in circling, you can kind of just like coast through a circle and sort of, notice a few things here and I don't know, admit to a story there or something, and say that you're curious about X, and then before you know it, it's time to go home.
I did a clowning course a week or so ago, which I introduced because I felt how powerful it was, what I was experiencing. It wasn't entirely unusual, but it was new in a way which almost was humbling. Like I froze, I got stage fright, I got lost. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. But something about the deep intimacy with vulnerability and failure in the clowning kind of practice felt really like just so enlivening. And something about how almost like how close we are to that life, and in the circling spaces, when it can become formulaic or patterns can start to like become like, oh, this is what we do. Like I feel this delight in the clown, this sort of perhaps malicious but also joyous play, which just kind of destabilizes, shakes things up. Point out the emperor has no clothes on. It's like, this is such a beautiful and powerful thing. And like there's a constant invitation towards that, towards really being with feel a lot of joy.
As we're nearing the end of our time, and I have this provocative question that I'm wanting to get in under the time limit here. The buzzer beater. I'm curious, especially with your experience in trainings and sort of higher level facilitation of circling, and I often, like, even in this conversation, hearing the way that you really use the principles of circling. Circling isn't this vague thing, like you're very much an important part of this path, and that you have this very clear view of it. I think a very interesting view of it from your place at TC, and that has me wonder, like, with knowledge of a magical worldview and the integration you've done between that and the principles, what are some things you would like to see change in the circling community generally, to integrate this stuff more? Maybe that's not a desire of yours, but I have like a sense that maybe there's something you might encourage people to change about their practice to kind of get more out of it, or to more deeply get our communities into into this bizarre thing we found ourselves in.
So I've a few times I brought these kind of subjects in and discussed them and explored with people, and the reception has been positive, but definitely mixed. And I think on reflection, it makes a lot of sense. Like, 'cause there are some ways in which these maps aren't for everyone, and they are also really powerful. And a lot of people have been like, "Wow, yeah, someone said thank you for this," because it was like it was filling in some spaces in their practice they didn't really understand, and it's like, oh yeah, it seems to fit in some quite helpful ways. And I feel very open in a way, and this is maybe quite an important part of it. Like, I feel very open to being like delusional. Like, some of this stuff is like, yeah, I'm not holding it 100%, and I don't want to market it as like this is definitely the truth. But it has been very powerful for me, has been very empowering for me, and it has been very meaningful. And I suspect it might potentially be like that for others. But something about the way of holding it a little bit softly, I think, is quite helpful as well. And if people are capable of holding these paradigms with the sense of soft and care and respect, that's also, I think, what makes people particularly powerful circlers, because they can meet the other's world and they can explore it and they can learn from it and they can be with it without being subsumed by it or without dominating it. So I find that the whole practice is an invitation towards this kind of potential, this kind of exploration, this kind of honoring. So if I want to see anything change, like, I don't think there's anything that needs to change per se, but like holding these principles, holding this integrity, this honoring, just to be part of what we're doing, I think that it does seem to be having impact. It does seem to be spreading. And I see people like yourself coming in with an openness to these things, other people as well. And people who are more cautious about these things, it's like, yeah, they have all the rights to be cautious. Like, there's a lot of delusion around, a lot of fake news. It seems quite reasonable to be cautious about what we let into our awareness, what we let colonize our ways of meaning. And I wouldn't want to like attack that in any way, but it does seem meaningful to allow there to be softness around this and dialogue and see what arises.
With that, Ben, thank you so much for coming on The Container. I feel really blessed just to have your wisdom and your perspective on here, and to hear your experience of walking these two paths that are really kind of the one path. I feel really grateful.
Yeah, I look forward to like listening to this in retrospect, and then also going like, oh, I wish I'd said that. Why didn't I say that? It's like,
yeah. Well, we'll always have you back on. So make a list.
Make a list.
Yeah. So if people want to be in circles led by Ben or to experience other services by Ben, how would they get a hold of you? And
depends which services. Buy me a drink first. That's usually a good way to initiate. I think I can be contacted through TC, or if anyone's already knows me through the network, I think open to people dropping me messages. But if I don't know, if you look like a very cute anonymous Russian lady, I probably will block you. So I've had so many of those recently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. You hop on Telegram and it turns out there are a lot of ladies who have been trying to get a hold of
Who knew? And I like the idea they're actually all genuine. It's like, why will no one talk to me? What is wrong with me?
Yeah. Well, the container is now closed, ladies and gentlemen. Keep it namaste.